So we're on Daf Lamed Ches Amud Beis. And we're towards the top of the Let's just see how many lines down. We're up to Zikas Nesua Osa. Where is that? What line is it?
7 at the end.
7. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
And we're going to discuss
7. Okay. Okay. Now we're talking about Ula, and the Gemara is going to now establish that according to Ula, Zikas Arusa Osa and Suffolk Arusa. So what happened? Ruvain was married to Sarah, let's say, but he wasn't fully married to Sarah. He had only implemented Erison, but not Nesuin. And then Ruvain dies, and Sarah falls for Yibam to Shimon. And that's called Zikas Arusa Osa Suffolk Arusa. And what we explained was that Suffolk Arusa means that the Zikas Yibum here is on a lower level than the original marriage that generates the Zika. The original marriage was Erison. There was no Nesuin between Ruvain and Sarah. And now, with Ruvain's death, we go down one level. We call it a Suffolk Arusa, which means that the Ishus of Zika now, between Sarah and Shimon, is less than Erison. It dips down Erison. So we have, in the laws of Ishus and marriage, we have 3 levels. We have Nesuin is full-fledged Ishus. Erison without Nesuin is, let's call it 3/4 of Ishus, but not full Ishus. And then we have Zika in a case where the original marriage only reached the level of Erison, and then we have a 3rd level, a 3rd notch, 1 notch below Erison, and that's called Suffolk Arusa. And now we're going to see, how do we prove that according to Ula, in the case of Zikas Arusa, we end up with a Suffolk Arusa. Again, the word Suffolk Arusa means that it's not an Ishus of Erison. And we'll see what that means. The Isal Kedaitach Vadai Arusa. If you're going to tell me that Zika is exactly identical to the status of the marriage that generated the Zika, right? The marriage between Ruvain, the late Ruvain, and his wife Sarah. So we take that Erison and we superimpose it on Zikas Yibum to Shimon, and Shimon now vis-a-vis Sarah is an Erison relationship. If that would be the case, then in Cain, how do we understand the Resha of our Mishnah, which was the case of the father died after his son-in-law died? So let's go the other way around. So Ruvain dies, and Sarah falls for Yibum to Shimon, and then Sarah's father dies and bequeaths a Yerusha to Sarah. And the Mishnah says, Modin Beit Shammai shemocheres menosenes v'kayam. Right, and that means, again, I'm just reviewing a little bit of the Gemara that we did yesterday. That means that that we recognize more than that. We allow, not just recognize, because recognize is the word that's fitting for b'di'evet, post facto. Not only do we recognize if she went ahead and did this, but we allow her to sell that property that she inherits from her father. And that makes no sense. Why? Because once there's erusin, a woman is not permitted to sell her nechasim. L'chatchila. Again, if she did so, we recognize the sale. You can't invalidate the sale. But l'chatchila, we don't want to allow a married woman, and erusin is enough to qualify her as a married woman, to go ahead and sell her properties. Because she's being mafkia, she's removing the rights of her husband. Again, it's her future husband, because it's before Nisuin, from these nechas. Vatnan, we have the case of a woman who had Kiddushin. So after the Kiddushin, she received an estate in a Yerusha. She inherited from her father or whoever it was that bequeathed her this Yerusha. Beit Shammai Omrim Timka. As far as Beit Shammai is concerned, we allow her to go ahead and sell these nechasim. She's only an arusa. She's before Nitzuin. Her husband has no rights to her possessions. And Beis Hillel Omrim Lo Timka. If we want to talk about a psychological explanation to this Beis Hillel, we would say the following. A woman is about to enter into a marriage relationship with her husband, and she sneaks away all her nechasim and sells them on the open market. That's not a good way of anticipating marriage. Again, this is on just a psychological level. Even Beis Hillel has to agree that her sale is valid if she went ahead and took the initiative and changed the facts on the ground and she sold her possessions. There's no way that her husband, who's not yet her husband, can invalidate the marriage. So therefore, we go back to our Mishnah, and our Mishnah says, Modin Beis Hillel shemocheres v'nosenes, which is a language of lechatchila. How could that be? Unless we assume that zikas erusin is only a suffix arusa. If zikas erusin is a vadai, it means that the zika is an exact duplicate of the marriage from which they gave birth to the zika, that generated the zika. If that's an equation, then how can Beis Hillel say that she's allowed to sell her nechasim? She's undermining her oros, who in this case is the Yevamot. The answer is that the Yavam is not an oros. He does not have the status of an oros. Why? Because when we get down to zika, we dip below the level of the original marriage. The notch is a lower notch. It's below erusin. And then Afkamina is going to be whether she can sell nechasim that she inherits after the zikas yibum was chal. Now, we're going to talk about a parallel case, meaning just like we discussed and analyzed erusin going down to zika, now we're going to analyze nisuin going down to zika. So it means that Ruvain was fully married to Sarah. He not only gave her Kiddushin, but he took her into the chuppah, and now he dies. Is zikas nisuin osa suffix nisuin? We're going to prove now that zika again dips below that which generated the zika in terms of our scale of ishus. And zika of nisuin is less than, it's a notch below nisuin. If you're going to maintain that in the case of nisuin, the zika is equal to the original nisuin between Ruvain and Sarah, that's impossible. Why? Because now we fast forward to the Sefer of our Mishnah. In the case again, a Shomeres Yavam, but Minan Esuin. Because again, we said that was the difference between the Reish and the Sefer. The Reish was a case of Erizin, the Sefer was a case of Nesuin. Is Beit Shammai Omrim, or maybe I switched Reish and Sefer around. If I did, I apologize. Anyway, Beit Shammai Omrim, Yachloku. No, this is the Sefer. I was wrong. Yeah, Yachloku Yorshei Abal im Yorshei Av. Beit Shammai were the ones who recognized the status of the Yavam, albeit as a Safek, and therefore he said Yachloku. But wait a second. If you're telling me that Zikas Nesuin is a Vadai, then why are you recognizing Yorshei Av? The Yorshei Av Beit Shammai should be out of the picture entirely. Why? Because Habal Yorish is Ishto. After Nesuin, so we're talking about a case where she died as a Shomeres Yavam, and if we're saying that the Zika of a Shomeres Yavam, if the original marriage was Nesuin, is equal to Nesuin, then the Yorshei Habal should be inheriting her estate after she dies. But Tanan says that if a married woman should nafla and nechasim sheneseis elu ve'elu modim, she'im machra v'nosna bal motzi v'dei lekuchos, which means that the Baal can invalidate the sale of his wife. He writes here, Kemet Shemei Shammai Modin, because it says Elu V'Elu Modin. Shenesua lo timkar, she cannot sell her possessions, v'af b'di'eved, ein hamachira kayemes. Harei shemishas nesuin, nimtzim hanechasim b'cheskes habal. Now, I'm a little bit concerned here that we shouldn't misunderstand the Gemara, because the Gemara is saying that with the Suin, the Nechasim are in the Cheskes Habal. That's not exactly precise. The formulation leaves you a little bit wanting, because it's not true that the Nechasim are now in the Rishus of the Baal. He gets rights to Peros. Let's talk about Nichsei Malug, right? Nichsei Malug means she brings in a piece of real estate, let's say a field or an orchard, into the marriage. She retains ownership on the field or the orchard. His rights are only to receive the benefits from the orchard, and the Peros are his. But the Gemara is pointing out that if she would go ahead and sell this orchard on the open market, she is in effect undermining the Baal's rights to eat the Peros. And therefore, he has the right to completely void that mechira. Why? Because it's after the suit. Elishmami no, we must assume in interpreting our Mishnah that Zikas the Suin also suffix. That the case of Zika is not the same identical level of the original marriage of his late brother, but rather it drops one notch. If it would be equated with the original Nesuin, then the Yorshei Haba, the Yorshei Av, would be totally out of the picture. He says, Kevan she'ena l'safek Nesuin, eina nechasim b'cheskas ha'av el safek. The Sober Beit Shammai, that now she and he, husband and Yavam, have the same chazaka rights, and no one is superior to the other one. Kevan sheyado shel haYavam ki yado shel haYevavam. The ein chazaka li'echad me'am yosem me'asheni, l'chein adif sheyachloku yorshei ha'bal and yorshei ha'av. We can now justify Beit Shammai that we split, in an event that she dies, we split her estate equally between Yorshei ha'bal and Yorshei ha'av. Why? Because Zika is only a Safek Nisuin. Had it been a Vade Nisuin, then for sure all the Nechasim would accrue or be inherited by the Yorshei ha'bal if you upgrade him to the status of Nisuin. And he adds a note here, Beis Hillel Sovrim, Sheyad HaYevama Adifa Miyad HaBal, Sharei Shalom Nafla Nechasim Kshahoisa Nesua El Kshahoisa Shomeres Yavam. So if I understand correctly, Beis Hillel, in their disagreement with Beit Shammai, are insisting that once you lower the status of the Zika, of the Yavam, below the level of Nisuin, then you're in effect voiding and disqualifying the yada of the Baal, of the Yavam. And therefore the Nechasim belong totally to the Isha. Just 1 second. I'm just trying to work out one little problem here. When did her father die? If he died while she was married to Ruvain, so then Ruvain has the chazaka on those nechas, and his chazaka is not inferior to hers. And now let's say her husband dies. Then the Zika. Yeah, I'm just not sure exactly whether it makes a difference when the father died. We're talking about a case where the father died after Ruvain died. And then we're going to exclude Shimon from his chazak on these nechasim because Shimon's Zika does not equal the Nisuin. It falls short of this. I would say Kal V'chomer, our father died. Nah, maybe in that case it's a little different. I'm just wondering what would be if her father died before Ruvain died. So Ruvain now has full Nisuin rights that could block her ownership, her chazak on these nechasim. Now he dies. I'm just going to read this one line. Beis Hillel Sovrim Sheyad HaYevama Adifa Miyad HaYavam, which I understood to be because Zika is only a suffix Nesu. But he writes here, Sharei, something wrong here in the printing. Sharei Shelo, I think you have to take out the Shin. Sharei Lo Naflu Hanechasim Ishahoisa Nesua. Again, I don't think he's coming lafuke a case where Naflu Nechasim during the lifetime of Reuven. I don't think that's his agenda. He's only talking about the fact that these properties that came into her possession did not come into her possession when she was in a Suah, where she was only a Shomeres Yavim with a Zika. And in a case of Zika, for Yiva, Beis Hillel insists that the Nechasim of Becheskas Isha. And therefore, Yorshei Av will inherit her when she dies. And the opposite is true if she inherited properties when she was in a Suah. Because in that case, her husband has full rights, and he has the main rights. So he can certainly block her sale. But in the case where she was not in the Suah, she inherited property when she was the Shomeres Yavam, and therefore, since the Suin is now, Zika is now a suffix the Suin, he the Yavam has no yad in her nechasim, and she has total chazaka on the nechasim. Amalei Rabbah, so Rabbah is now talking to Ula, and he's raising an objection to Ula. If you're correct, Ula, then Adam Miflegi begufa the Achar Nisa Liflegu b'chayeha Ula Peros. Why does the Mishnah record the machlokas between Beit Shammai and Beis Hillel regarding gufa? Right, we said that nichsei malug have two dimensions. There's kinyan aguf and there's kinyan peros. She owns the kinyan aguf when she brings property into the marriage. However, within the framework of ksuba, we transfer the kinyan haperos from her to him. Now, the Mishnah is talking about gufa shel karka. And what happened? She inherits karka, and then she dies. And who gets to inherit? According to Beis Hillel, it's Yarshei Isha. According to Beit Shammai, it's split. Liflagu b'chayeha she's still alive. Uleperos. Since Ula interpreted Beis Shammai as upgrading Zika, again, only mitzad self, but upgrading Zika to Nesuin, then Beis Shammai is going to insist on Yachloku, and Beis Hillel is going to say, wait a minute, Nesuin is only a suffix Nesuin. Zika is only one notch lower. Her yad is now chazaka al yado, and therefore she should be able to sell the nechasim even during her lifetime. So the same machlokas that we have in our Mishnah between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai, in a case where she dies, and how do we divvy up the estate that she inherited from her father? That identical machlokas should apply even if she's alive. Will she be able to sell these properties? Beis Hillel, we'll allow her to sell these properties because yada chazaka miyada. She has a more primary kinyan than he does, than the Yavam does, because the Yavam has, according to Beis Hillel, only a suffix nesuin. Whereas according to Beis Shammai, who, at least Mitzad Suffolk, were agreeable to upgrade the status of the Yovam to a Nesuin status. And that's why Beit Shammai, insisted on Yachloku. The same Yachloku Beit Shammai should apply when she's alive, vis-a-vis her ability to sell the Nechasim. Or vis-a-vis the Peros. Let's talk about Peros. What status does the Yavam have against the Yevama with regard to the Peros? She's got Nechasim, she's got Karka, she has, a vineyard, let's say, and now the grapes on the vine. Beit Shammai would insist that at least half of the Peros should accrue to the Yavam. Because Beit Shammai were the ones who recognized the Yavam as Zikas Nesuin. He says, Li Beit Shammai, if we're going to say that according to Beit Shammai, there's at least a suffix to upgrade the Zika to the status of an Asua, then on that side, the Peros should be taken by the Yavam. And since Beit Shammai say that the din of Zika Nesuin is a suffix Nesuin, therefore we should say Yachloku on the Peros. Beis Hill, on the other hand, would say that the Yavam has no schus in the Peros because it's suffix Nesuin. It's a Vadai suffix Nesuin. And therefore, the Yavam has no schus whatsoever. He doesn't even get one last orange. And Yosef Chiddush Lomar sheyesh lo koch beperos b'chayeh k'moha me'asher li'achar misasa. It would have been a bigger chiddush if you would have told me that she was alive. And Beis Hillel would say, nevertheless, the Yavam has no rights whatsoever to the Peros, because if you're comparing the Yad of the Baal, the Cheskes HaBaal, to Peros Nichse Ishto, and you want to give some sort of a status to the Baal, that he has a right to the Peros, then talk about the fact that his wife is alive. Why do you tell me that why does the Mishnah tell me that the Yevama died? Tell me a bigger chiddush. Even though the Yevama is alive and the Zika is active, and we're just simply, at this point, waiting for the Yavam to implement Yibum. And with that, we would say that the Yavam has a claim to Peros, because in general, in marriage, while the marriage is still alive and well, the Baal has rights to Peros. After she dies, maybe he might inherit her, because Baal Yorish is Ishto, but again, that's already a different level. The real McCoy level of Baal Ochel Peros Nitze Ishto, the Peros go to the Baal while the marriage is alive and well. So tell me that the Yevama is still alive. And the Mishnah does not formulate in the Sefer a machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai while she is still alive. Only after she dies. And the whole machlokes is about Yerusha, whereas Beis Hillel is willing to what's the word I want to use, to lizakot, how do you say, we'll just say it this way, to recognize the Baal's rights, Baal meaning the Yavam's rights to the Yerusha, at least 50%, Beis Hillel rejects them. The Baal, the Yavam has no rights. So what is the upshot of this kasha of Rabbah, this objection of Rabbah to Ula? Im Kain, I'm reading the commentary, Muchach, Shetaimom Shel Beit Shammai, Second. I learned to Beit Shammai. So again, Beit Shammai, in the case where she's still alive, conceded to Beis Hillel that the Yavam has no claim to the nechasim that she inherited from her father. That was the ratio of our Mishnah, correct? Just go back to the ratio for a second, Alam and Chesam and Aleph, and double check me. So why is it that when she's alive, even Beit Shammai agree that she, the Yevamot, has total rights over the nechasim that she inherited, and she can sell them. You can sell them l'chatchila. It must be that Kol Zman, as long as she's alive, she has total rights over the nechasim. Why is that so? According to Beit Shammai, the way Ula understood Beit Shammai, he has rights because we're upgrading the status of Zika to that of Nesuin. Just 1 second. So again, according to but Ula said that the ratio was a case of errors. 1 second. I'm a little bit. So I may have to research this a little further. What are we saying? That she has the upper hand as long as she's alive. And even Beit Shammai agreed to that. She can go ahead and sell the nechasim. So now we're worrying about payrolls. And why didn't the Mishnah formulate the machlokes between Beis Hillel Beit Shammai about payrolls? And that would be B'chayeha, she's still alive. And yet, Beis Shammai would say that the Yavam eats 50% of the payrolls. And why is that? Because Beit Shammai are of the opinion that at least 1/2 of the suffix would say that Zikas Nesuin is Nesuin, which means that he has the upper hand over payrolls. And as we said before, that would have been a bigger chiddush in Beis Hillel to tell me that I still insist that the Yom is completely cut off from payrolls, even though the marriage, so to speak, the Zika is still alive and active. So now we have to answer the question, why did the Mishnah insist in the Sefer of talking about a case where the Yevamot died? So I thought that Ula, just 1 second, said, just for a minute, let's go back to Ula. Right, Maishna Reisha de lo pligi, Maishna Sefer de Yomer Ula Reisha de nofla k'shi arusa, Sefer de nofla k'shi nesua. So in the case of the Reisha, she was an arusa, and I'm assuming that if she was an arusa, then the Baal doesn't eat pears, and Kolshkin, the Yavam wouldn't eat pears. So now we're saying that in the case of the Sefer, which was Suin, we could have had the same machlokas shin beisil beit Shammai b'chayel, vis-a-vis peiros b'chayel. Okay, so the Mishnah didn't have that. So then we have to assume that, see, this is the line I don't understand. Muchach shetaimam shel beit Shammai shel hodu b'reish and achasim b'ches masechet pascha overis k'shi kayemes. So the reason why in the Sefer they didn't mention the case where she's still alive, and that would have been a bigger chiddush. And we're talking about Ula's chat at the Sefer is a case of Nesuin. So in the light of Ula, that the Sefer is talking about a case of Nesuin, it should have been a bigger chiddush that they're arguing about parents b'chayel. Now, from the fact that the Mishnah did not in the Sefer, where Beit Shammai disagree with Beis Hillel, and they award the Yavam half of her Yerusha, they didn't mention that the Yavam would be awarded half of the Peiros, even though she's still alive. So then we go back to square one, and we have to again ask our original question: what's the difference between the Reisha and the Sefer? Why is it that Beit Shammai agree in the Reisha that when she's still alive, the Yavam has no yad, has no chazak on her possessions, whereas in the Sefer, Beit Shammai disagree, and they want to give the Yavam half rights to half of her possessions. We don't know the difference now. Because if you're going to tell me the differences between an Arusa and an Asua, meaning that the Sefer is an Asua case, then why do you insist on formulating this machlokas Beisil Beit Shammai in a case where she died and we have to divvy up the Arusha from her father? Why not just address the case which she's still alive, and the issue would be whether or not the Yavam has rights to her Peiros? And in the light of Beit Shammai in Zikas Nesuin upgrading the rights of the Yavam, such that now he has a Yad in Hanachasid, then in the Sefer, Beit Shammai should have disagreed in a case of Peiros, that even if she's alive, the Yavam should still have rights to negate her taking away the Peiros and selling the karka. I know we're running out of time, so I just want to add, just to get a little bit of a far here. Ela Omar Rabba, Idi ve'idi, both the Reisha and the Sefer, the Naflak Shinasua. So now Rabba is rejecting Ula, and again going back to the scoreboard in explaining the difference between the Reisha and the Sefer, why Beit Shammai agree in the Reisha that the Yavam is out of the picture, and they only disagree in the Sefer. And the answer is that we're talking about an Asua. We're assuming that Zikas Nesua, Osa Safek Nesua, and why is it that Beit Shammai are molded to Beis Hillel in the Reisha that the Nechasim are in the possession, of the Isha, of the Yevamot, the Ihi Kaima, she's alive. V'havile Ihi Vadai ve'inu Safek. The status of the Yevamot is Vadai. She definitely has a chazak in the Nechasim. Why? Because she owns the keren. She owns the guf hakarka, no matter how you slice the cake. Even if you'll upgrade the status of the Yavam to a Vadai Nesuin, his rights are limited to Peros. He has no rights in the Gufa Karka. So that's called Vada. She definitely has rights and Chazaka on the Nechas. His status, meaning the Yavam, is only that of a Suffolk, correct? Because even Beit Shammai, who recognizes the rights of the Yavam, it's only B'Torah Suffolk. That means that after the death of the Yevamot, Beit Shammai would argue that at least B'Torah Suffolk, the Yavam has rights to inherit the Yevamot. He's like a Nesua situation because we have that Suffolk. But in the case of the Reisha, where she's still alive, now she can claim Vada. In other words, when she dies, you're talking about the Yerusha. And if we upgrade, according to Beit Shammai, the Yavam status to an Asuin kind of status, then he inherits his wife. So he's vying to remove her completely from the Nechasim. Her in this case means her Yorshin. Yorshia. But in the Reisha, where she's still alive, she has the upper hand, and that's why even Beit Shammai would agree, because the Yavam's claim is only a suffix. But her claim, as long as she's alive, we're not dealing with divvying up her Yerusha, we're dealing with her Nechasim that she owns. She has a piece of property that's registered in the municipality. She's paying Arnona. So she's a Vada. She definitely has a Chazak on these Nechasim. And therefore, Beit Shammai concede that if the Yavam now comes to claim that you, my dear Yevamot, have no rights to sell the Nechasim, you're undermining my rights, the answer is he's a sufferer. He may have rights if you upgrade Zika to Nesuin. He may not have rights because, as we said before, Nesuin is at the best a suffix Nesuin. Zika, I'm sorry, is at best a suffix Nesuin. Her chazaka on these nechasim is a vada, and therefore the Gemara ends up with ein suffix motzi b'dei vada.
I think she clarified the situation.
Yeah.
If the other one comes to her and he says she can't do this, you can say "B'nei chalitza," and then you have no rights, or we do yibun and you do have. Clarify the situation.
He could demand of him to choose between Yibum and Chalitza and say to him, look, if you want rights, then marry me right through Yibum. If you don't marry me, then give me Chalitza and get lost. But the only question is, if she went ahead and sold Hanachas, what do we do with that sale? Does the Yavam have rights in the context of Beit Shammai to void that sale by saying that I'm a Nesua right now? No Zika, until I give you a Chalitza, which is like a get, we're in a marriage relationship. And Beit Shammai and the Sefer seem to recognize the rights of the Yavam to make such a claim. So the Gemara now of Rabbah is saying that those claims to the Yavam, with all due respect, according to Beit Shammai, are only suffix claims. The only problem is that suffix is just as good as her suffix, because we're talking about after she dies. And after she dies, now the question is, who inherits her? And on that point, Beit Shammai vacillate back and forth, and therefore yachloku. Masha'enke, while she's alive, and he's claiming, well, this is like a Nesuin relationship because we're saying that there's a suffix Nesuin. Why can't he at least block her sale for 50%? I don't know what we're going to do with the lokaf. I'll have to figure out which half he gives back. And now the Gemara activates the principle of Ein Safek Motzi Nidei Vade. Why? Because she definitely, beyond the shadow of a doubt, has it. Even if he wants to claim rights, but within marriage, she also has rights to these nechosim. In fact, she has rights to the gufa karka. His rights are limited to payros. You want to equalize them and say, well, it's 50-50. It's a stalemate. Fine. But at this point, we don't even know if he has 50. We're not even sure if he has the status of an Asua. He might have 0. She definitely, even if we grant him the status of an Asua, she definitely has rights to this property because she owns the Gufa Karka, even within the framework of marriage. Mashen came in the Sefer, when you're dealing with she's gone already, Yiskadal Yiskadash, and now we're trying to divvy up her possessions. Her estate has a Yerusha. Now the question is, who has Yerusha rights? Who should inherit? On the side that there is Nesuin, that Zikas Ibn makes Nesuin, he is the exclusive Yoresh of Hanafas. He gets 100%. On the side that we dip below Nesuin, and Zika doesn't climb up to the status of Nesuin, then she, as a Morish, has 100% rights to the estate. So it's 100 versus 100, which is 50 versus 50. Hence, Beit Shammai insists on Yachol. I think it's brilliant. Okay, there are both sides. So this is where we're going to stop. Let's make a note of it. Tomorrow is what? Wednesday? Yeah. But where is it here in the Gemara? I just want to make a line here, if you could help me out here. It's Sefer de Misa. Where is it? Sefer de Misa. Okay? That's what we get up to. Okay, thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Okay, great.